Welcome to my garden, GinGee GoodEarth production, Roman numeral 7, Part 13, A Universal History of the United States of America, also finishing up on the Declaration of the Independence, and a reading of the Star Spangled Banner. Look and see. What do we see today? Well, today's the birthday of America. It's the 4th of July. Usually we have an agricultural fair that we attend during this great week, but it's canceled due to COVID-19. But I will celebrate the 4th of July with you, and we'll have sparklers and a reading of the Declaration of the Independence. And so I'd like to start with that. The Declaration of Independence was designed for multiple audiences: the king, the colonists, and the world. It was also designed to multitask. Its goals were to rally the troops, win foreign allies, and to announce the creation of the new country. The introductory sentence states the Declaration's main purpose: to explain the colonists' right to revolution. In other words, to declare the causes which impel them to be separated from the king. Congress had to prove the legitimacy of its cause. It had just defied the most powerful nation on earth. It needed to motivate foreign allies to join the fight. These are the lines contemporary Americans know best. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with the certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These stirring words were designed to convince Americans to put their lives on the line for the cause. Separation from the mother country threatened their sense of security, economic and stability, and identity. The preamble sought to inspire and unite them through the vision of a better life. It lists grievances. The list of 27 complaints against King George III constitute the proof of the right to rebellion. Congress cast the causes which impel them to separation, and in universal terms for an international audience, join our fight, reads the subtext, and you join humankind's fight against tyranny. Resolution of Independence. The most important and dramatic statement comes near the end, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states. It declares a complete break with Britain and its king and claims the powers of an independent country. It was a parchment document, and you can see the document in the National Archives Museum. And again, I wanted to read information on Pennsylvania and Westsylvania and Allegheny. And this is from the book Pittsylvania, Pittsylvania, Country, American Folkways, George Swetnam. It's Chapter 3, The Struggles of a Young Region. Pennsylvania, Westsylvania, and Allegheny. No other area in America ever came so near being a separate state without becoming one as the Pennsylvania country. For nearly a quarter of a century, one plan after another was proposed for a new state west of the mountains. Not only the people who lived around Pittsburgh, but many others still have a conviction that the interests of the region are different and at times in opposition to those of eastern Pennsylvania. Transylvania at last became the state of Kentucky. Out of defeat, the state of Franklin eventually came to life as Tennessee. Even the lost cause of Vandalia blossomed again by the fortunes of war of West Virginia. And again, Philippi, West Virginia was the site of the very first Civil War battle. But Pennsylvania name never reached the roll of states. From the top of the Allegheny Mountains chain to its foot, Pennsylvania is the only state which embraces important, separate areas on both sides of the main ridges. The natural tendency for a separate state west of the mountains was so quickly apparent that even before the French had been ousted, mapmaker Lewis Evans pointed out there would be manifest advantages if His Majesty would be pleased to appoint a colony to be made in Ohio, with a separate governor. In March of 1759, less than half a year after Forbes had taken Fort Duquesne and named Pittsburgh, a letter from New Jersey to the Maryland Gazette reported a movement for the application to the Crown. As soon as peace came with the French for a rural charter, with proper encouragement to settle a new colony on the Ohio by the name of Pennsylvania. What with the Indian Wars, the Pennsylvania-Virginia border troubles, and the Revolution, the settlers usually had enough troubles and little enough government to keep their hands full without promoting new states. But the backers of feudal drives for special Indiana and Vandalia grants in the present territory, they were much similar to the Ohio Company's scheme, probably conned the possibility of including Pittsburgh in their colonies. In June of 1776, people in the Pennsylvania country were busy promoting a meeting to discuss either asking the Continental Congress for separation or taking action on their own and sending delegates to represent them in Congress. The meeting was never held, so far as history knows, but late in the same summer, the backers of a new state were getting signers for a petition to set up a new separate district, an independent province, and the government by the title and under the name of Westsylvania. The petition, which opposed joining the country to either Pennsylvania or Virginia, died a burning, but the spirit which had been behind it lived on, in spite of the wars or other troubles. In 1780, the court of Yakagana County, which Virginia had set up to include Pittsburgh and much of the Monongahela Valley, drew up a formal petition for a new state west of the Alleghenies. The petition is in the court record, still preserved at Pittsburgh, in the hand of a member of the court, Benjamin Johnston. But there is evidence that its proponents included Colonel William Crawford, soon to die in the Indian Wars, John Cannon, founder of Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, and Jefferson College, Thomas Brown, founder of Brownsville, near the site of Indian Redstone Old Fort, and Dorsey Pentecost, a member of the Supreme Council of Pennsylvania. Pentecost openly predicted the line between Pennsylvania and Virginia would never be run, and that this country would never be Pennsylvania or Virginia, but a new state. The Youghiogheny petition to the Continental Congress appealed on the ground that the settlers had endured dangers and hardships almost without outside aid. For a distinct and separate state west of the Allegheny Mountains, of such extent of country and under such name, as you and your wisdom shall see meet and convenient. The grounds of the request included matters which ever since had caused some people of the area to feel their interests are widely at variance with those of eastern Pennsylvania. Their first nature having placed an almost impassable mountain between this and the states eastward alone is sufficient to ground our petition. So again, they wanted to implore on them that they wanted to be their own state, and when they were able to act in December of 1782, declaring that any attempt to set up a new state in whole or in part upon her territory would be treason, and that was enforced after the Revolutionary War was over. Most people in the country's districts were new statism was strong, were Calvinists. So the Supreme Court sent Reverend James Finley, a Presbyterian, to influence them against separation. So again, Pennsylvania wanted to be separate from Virginia. They also had questions on taxes and collection. Pennsylvania moved slowly even after the border with Virginia had been settled, setting up Allegheny, Fayette, and Washington counties to give the people of the area more of a feeling of self-government. So there you go. I just wanted to read that. It shows that Pennsylvania as a state did separate their border from Virginia, and also they set up Allegheny, Fayette, and Washington, Westmoreland County. And so by 1782, an edict was passed that Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania country, and that the city has always taken the lead for nearly a century and 3/4. There have been flashes of that same sentiment down, and the politicians, business leaders, and newspapers like to call Allegheny County playfully the state of Allegheny. Now I know that Trenton, Pennsylvania was first settled before downtown Pittsburgh on the peninsula on the Three Rivers, and Trenton was to be of Pittsburgh, of what Pittsburgh is of today. And Freeport was named Freeport because you could dock your boat for free, and that was Freeport. So a lot of history. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and read the Star-Spangled Banner. The Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? Oh, the shore dimly seen through the mist of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence repossess. What is it that which the breeze over the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses. Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in the full glory reflected, now shines on the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner, oh long may it wave, over the land of the free and the home of the brave. And where is that band who so valiantly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus be it ever when freemen shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause is just, and this be our motto, and God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Written by Francis Scott Key. And now we're going to continue to read a universal history of the United States of America. And we're on page 96. In 1698, the Earl of Bellamont was appointed governor. He was particularly instructed to clear the American seas of the pirates who infested them, and who it was suspected had even received encouragement from the Governor Fletcher. The government declining to furnish the necessary naval force, the Earl, with others, engaged in a private undertaking against them. The association procured a vessel of war, gave the command of it to Captain Kidd, and sent him to cruise against the pirates. He had been but a short time at sea, when, disregarding his instructions, he made a new contract with his crew, and on the Atlantic and Indian Ocean became himself a daring, atrocious, and successful pirate. 3 years afterwards he returned, burned his vessel, and appeared publicly in Boston. He was apprehended and sent to England, where he was tried and executed. When Governor Bellamont had settled the affairs of that government, he returned to New York, where he died in 1701, greatly lamented. Scarcely had the colonies recovered from the war, which ended in 1697, before they were again involved in the horrors of another war with the French, Indians, and Spaniards, which continued from 1702 to March 31st, 1713. In February 1704, Deerfield in Massachusetts was surprised in the night. About 40 persons were killed and 150 made prisoners, among whom were Mr. Williams, the minister, and his family. They came to the house of Mr. Williams, forced open the doors, and entered the room where Mr. Williams was sleeping. Awakened by the noise, he seized his pistol and snapped it at the first Indian, but it missed fire. The house was then plundered, and 2 of his children and the black female servant were butchered before his eyes. The savages at length suffered his wife and himself, with 5 children, to put on their clothes and prepare for a long journey. Every house but the one next to Mr. Williams was consumed. One house still remains as a painful memento to posterity. The front door was hacked and hewn with hatchets until the savages had cut a hole through it. Through this hole they fired into the house. This door, which still bears its ancient wounds, and the whole, closed only by a board tacked on within, remains now as the savages left it, and it is most interesting monument. Through the windows they also fired, and one bullet killed the female head of the family, sitting up in bed, and the mark of that bullet, as well as 4 others, is visible in that room. In one of the holes in a joist another bullet remains to this day. This family were all killed or carried into captivity. The second day Mrs. Williams began to fail, and could go no further. Her husband requested permission to remain with her, but they plunged a hatchet into her head and compelled him to proceed. Before the termination of their journey, 20 more shared the same fate. Those who reached Canada were treated with humanity by the French. At the end of the 2 years, Mrs. Williams and 57 others were redeemed, and he returned to Deerfield, where he continued his labors in the ministry 12 years and died. His eldest daughter was married to an Indian in Canada, where she lived many years. She came into New England once or twice with her son-up and children to visit her friends, and at her death left a numerous family. In 1707, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire dispatched an armament against Port Royal in Nova Scotia, which was in possession of the French. The expedition consisted of 1,000 men, but returned without accomplishing its object. General Nicholson visited England and proposed an expedition against Canada. In June 1711, Admiral Walker, with a fleet of 15 ships of war and 40 transports, arrived at Boston, and taking on board 2 additional regiments, he sailed from Boston the last of July. At the same time, General Nicholson proceeded from Albany at the head of 4,000 men from Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey against Canada. The fleet had advanced about 10 leagues up the river St. Lawrence when the river became foggy. Different opinions arose concerning what course to take. The English pilots recommended one course, the Americans another. The admiral, like all other English officers, adopted the advice of his own pilots, and about midnight 9 transports were driven upon the rocks and dashed to pieces. About 1,000 men sunk to rise no more. Not a single American was lost. The admiral returned to England, and on the 15th of October his ship blew up, and 400 seamen perished. The New England troops returned home, and when Nicholson, who had advanced as far as Lake George, learned the fate of the fleet, he led back his troops to Albany. The next year, 1713, France and England made peace at Autrec. This relieved the northern part of the country, and in the same year peace was concluded with the Indians. Such was the destruction of lives in this war that the population of New England was sensibly decreasing. The expenses were great, which obliged them to issue bills of credit or paper money, which perplexed the government in all their transactions. In 1716, Samuel Street, a colonel in the army of the celebrated Duke of Marlborough, was appointed governor. On his arrival in the province, he found the people divided into parties, one in favor of a public bank which had just been established, the other for a private bank. He joined the former. The latter became hostile, and led by Mr. Cook, opposed with virulence of his measures. Let's move in closer to the picture show. And you can see artwork from different museums: New York City Metropolitan Art Museum and the Westmoreland County Museum of Art, Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Happy 4th of July! 4th of July 2020. Not a single American was lost. The admiral returned to England, and on the 15th of October his ship blew up, and 400 seamen perished. The New England troops returned home, and when Nicholson, who had advanced as far as Lake George, learned the fate of the fleet, he led back his troops to Albany. The next year, 1713, France and England made peace at Utrecht. This relieved the northern part of the country, and in the same year, peace was concluded with the Indians. Such was the destruction of lives in this war, that the population of New England was sensibly decreasing. The experiences were great, which obliged them to issue bills of credit or paper money, which perplexed the government in all their transactions. In 1716, Samuel Street, a colonel in the army of the celebrated Duke of Marlborough, was appointed governor. On his arrival in the province, he found the people divided into parties, one in favor of the public bank, which had just been established, the other for a private bank. He joined the former. The latter became hostile, and led by Mr. Cook, opposed with virulence all his measures. In 1715, after several years of profound peace, an Indian war broke out in South Carolina. All the tribes, which really are nations, from Florida to Cape Fear, had been long engaged in a conspiracy against the whites. On the morning of the 15th of April, the first blow was struck at the settlements around Port Royal. 90 persons were massacred. Some of the inhabitants escaped by embarking on a board vessel, which then lay in the harbor and sailed directly for Charleston. Now, Port Royal is a place where I'd visit often to collect shark's teeth on the beach. And Port Royal is a wonderful place. And I lived downtown Beaufort, and also I lived on Fripp Island, which was the furthest point. The home that I lived in was the furthest house out in the Atlantic Ocean. And Port Royal was still very underdeveloped, but it also was a shipping port. So the cargo ships changed captains at every port. So a cargo ship coming up from Savannah, Georgia, would dock at Port Royal Marina, and then they switch captains, and then another captain would take the place of the cargo ship, and then he would steer that ship to Charleston, and again they would switch the captains. So it wasn't like one person acted as a boat captain for an entire trip along the coast. So, a lot of nice memories of Port Royal, especially the beach, where I could collect lots and lots of shark's teeth. 90 persons were massacred. Some of the inhabitants escaped by embarking on board a vessel which then lay in the harbor and sailed directly for Charleston. At a plantation on Goose Creek, 70 whites and 40 faithful Negroes, being protected by a breastwork, determined to maintain their post, but on the first attack their courage failed them, and they agreed to surrender. The instant they fell into the power of the enemy, all were barbarously murdered. Governor Craven from North Carolina, at the head of 1,000 men, marched against the savages. He discovered several small parties, who fled before him. At Salt Catchers he found them all assembled, and there an obstinate and bloody battle was fought. The whites were victorious and compelled the enemy to leave the province. Most of them fled to Florida and were kindly received by the Spaniards. In 1719, at a general review of the militia at Charleston, occasioned by threatening invasion of the colony from Florida, the officers and soldiers bound themselves by a solemn compact to support each other in resisting the tyranny of the proprietors, and the assembly, which was then in session, requested the governor by respectful address to consent to administer the government in the king's name. He refused, and by proclamation dissolved the assembly. The members immediately met and elected Colonel James Moore their governor. He was a bold man and exceedingly well qualified for a popular leader. In a turbulent season, he accepted the appointment and administered the affairs of the colony. The conduct of the proprietors and people was brought before His Majesty's Council. After a full hearing, it was decided that both colonies should be taken under the protection of the Crown. In 1719, Hunter, governor of New York, quitted the province, and his authority devolved on the Peter Schuyler. The next year, William Burnet, son of the celebrated bishop, was appointed governor. Turning his attention towards the wilderness, he perceived that the French, in order to secure themselves the Indian trade and confine the English to the seacoast, were erected forts. From St. Lawrence to the Mississippi, he endeavored to defeat these designs by building a trading house and fort at Oswego on Lake Ontario, but the French applied with great activity in accomplishing their object. They launched 2 vessels upon the lake and erected a fort at Niagara. They had previously erected Fort Frontenac, commanding the outlet, Frontenac. The peace of 1713 was of short duration. In 1722, the Eastern Indians began to be hostile, murdering several persons and burning the town of Brunswick. In 1723, Dover was surprised and several persons killed and a number carried into captivity. And in 1724, repeated attacks were made, and the English kept in a continual alarm. Numbers were killed. The English, in their turn, made an attack upon Norwich Way, killed Rod, the Jesuit, and about 87 Indians. The war now raged with violence, and until 1726, when peace was restored, this treaty was greatly applauded, and under it, owing to the more specific feelings of the Indians and more faithful observance of the English, the colonies experienced unusual tranquility for a long time. The settlement of Georgia in June 1732. Several benevolent gentlemen in England suggested a plan of conveying all the indigent subjects of Great Britain thither. To a project springing from motives so noble, the people and the government extended their patronage. In November 1732, 100 immigrants embarked for Georgia. The next year, 500 persons arrived at that place, but it was soon discovered that these people had become poor by their idleness and were not fitted to fill the grooves of Georgia. The trustees therefore offered to receive such as had become poor by unavoidable misfortune, and grant to each one who should repair to the colony 50 acres of land. This offer brought more than 400 persons into Georgia. In 1738, a disturbance was created among the Negroes in South Carolina. A number of them assembled at Stone, surprised and killed 2 white men who had the charge of a warehouse from which they took guns and ammunition. They then chose a captain, and with drums proceeding southward, burning every house and killing all the whites that fell in their way, and compelled all the Negroes to join them. Governor Bull, who was returning from the southward, accidentally met them, hastened out of the way, and spread the alarm. The news soon reached Willtown, where a large congregation were attending divine service. The men, according to the law, brought their arms to the place of worship, and marched directly in the quest of the natives. While in an open field, they were dancing with frantic exultation at their late success. They were suddenly attacked. A number were killed, some fled, and the remainder taken. They who had been compelled to join them were pardoned, but all the leaders suffered death. About 20 altogether were murdered. In 1744, war broke out between England and France, and the colonies were involved. Their commerce and fisheries suffered great injury from privateers fitted out at Louisburg, a French port on Cape Breton. Its situation was important. Nearly $6 million had been expended on its fortification. It was of great importance that the colonies should destroy or take possession of this stronghold. Although it was considerable impossible, having exacted of the general court an oath of secrecy, the governor in January of 1745 communicated to them the project. Many heard it with amazement. So strong was this place, and so weak were the colonies, that the thoughts of attacking it seemed rash and presumptuous. The secret was discovered by an honest member, who prayed for divine blessing on the attempt, if it should be made. The people were instantly struck with the advantage of possessing the place. When the decision was made, a petition signed by a large number of merchants was presented to the general court, praying them to comply with the governor's proposals. The subject was again discussed, and the vote in favor of the expedition was only 1 majority. The question was now decided, and all who were before averse to the enterprise united heartily with supporters to carry it into execution. The other New England colonies agreed to furnish assistance, but a boat was dispatched in Commodore Warren in the West Indies to invite him to their assistance. In the 2 months, an army of more than 4,000 men were enlisted, clothed, victualled, and equipped for service in the 4 New England colonies, which did not contain 400,000 inhabitants. I'm going to change the music. Enjoy the picture show. I looked up the word. In 2 months, an army of more than 4,000 men were enlisted, clothed,
Victual.
and the word
Victual.
victualed. It means the supplies of food, provisions. So that's a new word for me. Food usable by people.
Victual.
Victualed.
Victual. Victual.
And equipped for service in the 4 New England colonies, which did not contain 400,000 inhabitants. To lay in provisions, to supply with food,
Victual. Victual. Aphelion. Aphelion. Aphelion.
Aphelion is the point farthest from the sun in the path of an orbiting celestial body, such as a planet. And again, the 4th of July today, that marks a partial solar eclipse tonight. A planet reaches the aphelion only once a year, and the event typically falls approximately 14 days after the June solstice, which marks the first day of summer for the northern hemisphere and the first day of winter for the southern hemisphere. So,
Aphelion.
aphelion is the word of the day, and on July 4th, 2020. So I'm going to try to do a couple more pages. We're on page 102. Hip, hip, hooray. I have to put a flashlight on this book. It's so hard to read it. It's all blotched. It's like a parchment piece of paper that's, blotched with oil stains. On the 23rd of March, the dispatch boat returned from the West Indies with information that the Commodore Warren declined furnishing any aid without orders from England. This intelligence was kept a secret. About the 19th of April, the troops, together with those from Connecticut and New Hampshire, arrived safely at Canso. Commodore arrived safely at Canso. Commodore Warren had but just dispatched his answer, and when he received orders to repair to Boston with such ships as he could spare, the concert measures with Governor Shirley for His Majesty's service in North America, he sailed immediately. But learning that the transports had sailed for Canso, he steered directly for that place. He added much to the naval strength. Several vessels of war, which had been sent to cruise before Louisburg, had captured several French ships and prevented any intelligence of the expedition from reaching them. The appearance of the fleet on the 30th of April gave the French the first intimation of their danger. The troops immediately landed, and the next day 400 marched around the hills, approached within a mile of the Grand Battery, setting fire to all the houses and stores on the way. Many of these contained tar and pitch, which produced a thick smoke and completely enveloped the invaders. The fears of the French were increased by their uncertainty. They imagined all the army was coming upon them and throwing their powder into a well, destroying the battery, which the English took without loss. This was uncommon good fortune, but the most difficult labor of the siege remained to be performed. The cannon were to be drawn nearly 2 miles over a deep morass in a plain view, and within gunshot of the enemy's principal fortification. For 14 nights the troops, with straps over their shoulders and sinking to their knees in mud, were employed in the service. By the 20th of May they had erected 5 batteries, one of which mounted 5 42-pounders and did great execution. Meanwhile the fleet cruised in the harbor and was equally successful. It captured a French ship of 64 guns, loaded with stores for the garrison, to whom the loss was distressing. English ships of war were continually arriving and added such strength to the fleet that a combined attack upon the town was resolved upon. The enemy, discovering this design, deemed it unwise to run the hazard of an assault. On the 15th of June, the French commander proposed a cessation of hostilities, and on the 17th capitulated. Intelligence of this event spread like lightning through the country. The French flag was still standing upon the walls of Louisbourg, which decoyed several India ships, supposed to be worth 600,000 pounds. Well might the citizens of New England be elated with these glad tidings. Without even a suggestion from the mother country, their commerce and fisheries were now secure. France, fired with resentment at her loss, made extraordinary exertions to retrieve it and to inflict chastisement on New England. The next summer she dispatched to the American coast a powerful fleet, carrying a large number of soldiers. The news of its approach spread terror throughout New England, but an uncommon succession of disasters, which the pious of that time attributed to the special interposition of Providence, deprived it of all power to inflict injury. After remaining a short time on the coast, it returned to France, having lost 2 admirals, both of whom, it was supposed, put an end to their lives through chagrin, having also by tempest been reduced to 1/2 its force, and effected nothing. In 1748, peace was concluded. Each party restored all its prisoners and conquests, a striking but not uncommon illustration of the folly of war. Louisbourg, though conquered by the colonies, was exchanged by Great Britain for territories which she had lost in Europe. New England murmured at this injustice, but what availed the murmurs of the weak? In 1750, an act was passed prohibiting the exportation of hats out of the plantations of America, and to restrain the number of apprentices taken by hat makers. Also, an act providing a penalty of 100 pounds for the erection of any mill, slitting or rolling of iron, or any plating forged to work with a tilt hammer. The next chapter is chapter 5. We're on page 104. French and Indian War, which commenced in 1756 and continued until 1763. The war, which ended in 1948, for a short period gave peace to America, and the population in the 13 colonies amounted to 1,100,000. Scarcely had the colonies time to reap the benefits of peace before their prospect was clouded, and the sound of war filled the land with general anxiety and distress. In 1756, the 18th of May, Great Britain declared war against France. The general cause leading to this war, commonly called the French and Indian War, the encroachment of the French upon Nova Scotia, which had been ceded to Great Britain by the 12th article of the Treaty of Utrecht. About this time, a company of English traders established trading houses on the banks of the Ohio. And there, I'll leave it there. We'll start on the bottom of page 104, and we will continue with chapter 5. And chapter 6 is a summary view of the causes that led to the American Revolution. Okay, so that's where we're at. I'm going to bookmark this. Where's my bookmark? And I would like to go ahead and end this GinGee GoodEarth production with a note on honey. Honey, the most exquisite delicacy to be found any place in nature. Comb honey is the only sweet in the world that is made only by honeybees. The honeybee build their delicate comb and fill it with honey in their architecture layout pattern of more than thousands and thousands of hexagon miniature containers. It's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years. Abraham Lincoln.